Namaste to everyone. Today, in this discussion, we are going to have a detailed discussion on caste system in India as a fusion. That is, how best we can able to understand about caste, Varna and Jati based on Vedic literature and also modern anthropological theories and concepts. Understanding the caste system in India, Varna, Jati and social stratification. The caste system in India is one of the most intricate and debated social structure in the world, deeply rooted in history, philosophy and lived experience. To understand it, one must move beyond simplistic notions of hierarchy and delve into its dual foundations, Varna and Jati, which were originally conceived as the dynamic framework based on duties, qualities, and occupations. Over time, these fluid concepts were transformed into rigid social hierarchies through historical process, particularly during colonial rule. Scholars like Louis Dumont, Ghurye, Hutton have provided vital theoretical lenses through which to examine the system's transformation from an idealized moral order to stratified and politicized identity structure. The present lecture attempts to explore the origin, evolution, and interpretation of caste, drawing from several texts, historical records, and sociological insights to offer a comprehensive and important understanding of its complexity and consequences. Now, first let us define Varna. What is Varna and its etymology? The Varna comes from the Sanskrit word Ri, means to cover or to classify, and is often interpreted as a color, metaphorically signifying classification. We can define Varna as a theoretical classification of society into four broad categories based on occupational roles and duties, that is dharma, as described in ancient texts such as the Rigveda and from Purusha Sukta. The four Varnas are Brahmins, that is priests, scholars and teachers, knowledge and rituals. Example, performing yajnas, teaching Vedas. Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers, protection and governance. Example, kings like Rama and Arjuna as protector figures. Vaishyas, merchants, traders and agriculturists, that is economic functions. Example, gilding of traders or landowners managing wealth. Shudras, laborers and service providers, that is supporting functions. Example, artisans, cleaners and other skilled or manual laborers. Now let us look into the aspect of Jati. The etymology of Jati is derived from the Sanskrit word Jata, means born or brought into existence. The definition of Jati is refers to the thousands of endogamous, that is marrying within the group, and occupational specialization communities that make up Indian society. These groups are often localized and hierarchical based on birth and are much more diverse than the Varna system. For example, a carpenter in Maharashtra may belong to the Sutar Jati, while a weaver in Tamil Nadu may belong to the Devanga Jati. Jati are regional specific and evolve over time, creating a complex network of identities. The key features of Jati is endogamy in nature, marrying within the Jati itself. Occupational linkage is an important one that Jati often follow hereditary occupations. Social hierarchy. Some Jatis consider themselves superior and inferior to others. Now let us look into the aspect of the caste. Etymology of the caste is the term caste comes from the Portuguese word casta, meaning race or lineage. introducing by European colonists in the 16th century to describe India's complex social order. The definition of the caste is a colonial construct that attempted to generalize both Varna and Jati under a single term, often missing their nonsensical distinctions. It was used by the British to classify Indians into rigid social categories for census and administrative purposes. For example, during the British census of 1901, people were forcibly classified into castes, even where such identities were previously more fluid. Now let us look into the theoretical framework of Varna system. The Varna system, derived from the Sanskrit word for color or a class, is a theoretical and normative framework that classified society into four main groups based on qualities, that is gunas, and duties, that is dharma, rather than birth. The four Varnas, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras, were meant to ensure the smooth functioning of the society by assigning the roles based on inherent qualities and aptitudes. In early Vedic literature, Varna was not birth determined but based on individual nature and actions. The Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4 and sloka 13, states like this: Chaturvarnam maya srustam guna karma vibhagashaha. Meaning of this sloka is, meaning the fourfold Varna system was created by the Lord based on guna, that is qualities, and karma, that is on actions. This implies a moral and spiritual basis rather than hereditary one. Over time, however, this idealized textual model was often misinterpreted or co-opted into a birth-based hierarchy. Originally, social mobility was theoretically possible. For example, Rishi Valmiki, the author of the Ramayana, was said to have been born into a marginalized community but rose to become a revered sage. Similarly, sage Vyasa, the compiler of the Vedas and the Mahabharata, was born of a fisherwoman. Thus, the Varna system began as a flexible and philosophical concept to categorize society by attitudes and duties. However, it became increasingly rigid when merged with the practical societal norms and misused by later socio-political institutions. Now let us look into the Jati system as localized and functional stratification. The Jati system is the actual lived social organization found throughout Indian society, unlike the idealized Varna model. Jati, from Sanskrit jata, means born or brought into existence, refer to thousands of endogamous intra-marriages groups defined by region, language, occupation, culture, and social customs. Jatis often functioned as occupational guilds and evolved originally over centuries, reflecting the dynamic and diverse nature of Indian civilization. Jatis vary greatly in their ritual, deities, food practices, taboos, and even marriage rules. For example, the Yadava Jati, traditionally associated with pastoralism and cow herding, including many subgroups spread across different regions of India. In Uttar Pradesh, Yadavas are politically powerful and considered dominant, while in other areas of India, they may be categorized as social and educationally backward classes. Unlike the theoretically Varna system, Jati allowed for more practical social mobility, especially through processes like Sanskritization, where lower status groups adopt customs of higher status groups to elevate their social standings. Some Jatis could rise in hierarchy by gaining wealth, power, or religious influence. Jati-based identities were also highly localized. The same occupation might carry different social values in different regions. For instance, toddy tappers in Tamil Nadu might be viewed differently than those in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, depending on historical status, land ownership, and political clout. Hence, the Jati system represents the functional and contextual social reality of Indian society, fluid in nature but also deeply rooted in local traditions and occupations. The caste system as a fusion and colonial rigidification. The term caste, derived from Portuguese word casta, meaning lineage or breed, was imposed by European colonizers to describe Indian social divisions, while it attempted to map both Varna and Jati. The terms oversimplified and distorted the highly intricate and fluid Indian social fabric. Over time, the caste system emerged as a fusion of theoretical Varna and practical Jati systems, but was rigidified and codified during the British colonial rule. During the 19th and 20th centuries, British administrators attempted a systematized Indian society for administrative convenience. The caste census and subsequent policies like reservations and separate electorate forced diverse and flexible Jatis into a fixed hierarchical structure. This hardened of caste identifies removed the fluidity that had previously allowed for upward mobility through the wealth, merit, or religious assimilation. For instance, before colonial intervention, some lower Jatis could rise in status through land acquisition, marital service, or adopting higher caste rituals, a process known as Sanskritization, but colonial records froze them into categories like low caste or untouchables, making such shifts socially difficult. The rigid caste system is what most people associate with Indian society today. It becomes not only a social identifier but also an administrative label, resulting in institutional discrimination and inequality that persists despite post-independence reforms. Thus, the modern caste system is not traditional Indian institution, but rather a product of colonial categorization, but upon earlier Varna and Jati systems, but distorted by external interpretation and bureaucratic formalizations. In this discussion, an attempt has been made to look into the scholarly perspectives of J.H. Hutton, G.S. Ghurye, and Louis Dumont about their views on Varna, Jati, and caste system. J.S. Hutton, an eminent anthropologist and a former Census Commissioner of India, emphasized the distinction between Varna and Jati. According to him, Varna is an idealized theoretical model serving as a broad conceptual framework articulated in religious and philosophical texts like Manusmriti or Bhagavad Gita. In contrast, Jati is the actual lived reality, the operative unit of Indian society. He argued that Jati are highly localized, often occupational, and far more numerous and fluid than the fourfold Varna classification. Hutton also maintained that caste rigidity was not intrinsic to early Vedic society, but evolved over time. He noted that early texts did not enforce endogamy strictly, and social mobility based on merit or change of occupation was possible. The rigid and hierarchical caste structure, according to him, emerged later and was exacerbated during medieval and colonial periods, especially due to administrative classification. His approach helped scholars appreciate the dynamic nature of the caste in historical context rather than viewing it as a static or a primordial institution. Hutton's distinction between textual ideology and social practice continues to be influential in modern caste studies. Now let us look into the G.S. Ghurye's important views on caste, Varna and Jati system. Ghurye's Varna, often regarded as the founding father of the caste sociology in India. Ghurye classic work Caste and Race in India presents a multifaceted understanding of caste. He moved beyond the simplistic definitions and argued that caste is not merely a matter of occupational division but a complex institution defined by 6 features. They are segmental divisions of society, hierarchy, endogamy, restrictions on food and social interaction, that is, commensality, civil and religious disabilities and privileges, hereditary occupations. He highlighted that caste was deeply influenced by regional politics, religious movements, and economic factors, especially under the kinship and temple economies. Ghurye also noted the role of Brahminical ideology in legitimizing the caste through religious sanctions. Yet, he acknowledged that local conditions and inter-Jati competition often defied the Varna ideal. Ghurye's work was pivotal in shaping how caste was viewed as a social institution, deeply embedded in ritual, politics, and economics. His analysis laid the groundwork for understanding the caste as a flexible but structured system, far more nonsensed than a rigid hierarchy. Louis Dumont, in his seminal work on Homo hierarchies, provided a structuralist interpretation of the caste system. He argued that caste is not simply a social or economic institution, but is rooted fundamentally in religious, ritual worldview, particularly around the binary opposition of purity and pollution. According to Dumont, Indian society values hierarchical differences over equality. Unlike modern Western society, he claimed that this ideology hierarchy, where Brahmin were ritually pure and Dalits impure. Organized social structure, Dumont distinguished between status societies like India and contract societies like the West, noting that caste is less about individual rights and more about collective duties and positions within a symbolic order. While his theories have been critiqued for overemphasized ideology and underestimating economic factors, Dumont's work remains central in caste studies. He brought global attention to the philosophical depth of the caste, linking it with the cosmology and symbolic anthropology. His emphasis on the inner logic of the caste, rather than treating it as a backwardness, led to a deeper cross-cultural appreciation of Indian society. Now let us look into the Nicholas Dirk's views on caste, Jati and Varna. In Castes of Mind, Colonialism and Making of the Modern India, historian Nicholas Dirks argued that caste as we know it today was a product of colonial knowledge and administrative power. British colonialism, through census, ethnographic surveys, and codification, transformed caste from fluid context-dependent institution into a rigid system of identity and hierarchy. Dirks claimed that colonial rules frozen Jati into a fixed categories. Through the creation of official records, these became self-fulfilling prophecies as communities began internalizing colonial classifications. For Dirks, caste is a colonial construction as much as an indigenous tradition. Understanding its modern form requires unpacking the impact of imperial power structure. Now let us look into the M.N. Srinivasan's views on the caste and Varna and Jati system. M.N. Srinivas, an influential Indian sociologist, introduced key concepts like Sanskritization and dominant caste. According to him, lower Jati could elevate their status by adopting the customs, rituals, and lifestyles of a higher caste, a process he termed Sanskritization. This showed that mobility within the caste system was possible, especially in pre-colonial times. Srinivas also stressed the importance of lower power dynamics, introduced the concept of dominant castes, groups that were numerically strong, economically influential, and politically active regardless of their ritual status. His work countered the static view of caste by demonstrating its dynamism and adaptability. After discussing the views of important anthropologists and sociologists' views on Jati, Varna, and caste system, now let us look into the aspects of historical evolution of the caste system briefly. The caste system in India was evolved over a millennia, shaped by religious, economic, political, and colonial influences. In the Vedic period, the Varna system was first articulated in the Purusha Sukta of the Rigveda, which described a fourfold classification Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra, based on functions and qualities, gunas, and karma, not hereditary. This system was normative and idealistic, meant to maintain social harmony through a division of labor. During the later Vedic and post Vedic periods, the rise of urbanization, trade guilds, and regional diversities led to emergence of Jatis, which were localized endogamous groups linked to specific occupations, regions, and cultural practices. Unlike the rigid Varna system, Jatis were numerous and flexible, allowing for mobility in some cases. In the medieval period, with the rise of Bhakti movements, many saints like Kabir, Basava, and Ravidas challenged caste hierarchies and emphasized spiritual equality. Simultaneously, the advent of Islamic rule altered social dynamics where some lower caste converted or gained new roles. The colonial period marked a turning point. The British, especially through the 1901 census, attempted to codify the caste identities, asking Indians to define their Jati or Varna. This frozen fluid identities into rigid hierarchies, further institutionalized by laws and reservations like those of scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and backward communities. What had once been a dynamic context based on system became a bureaucratically fixed structure shaping caste politics into the modern era. At length, we have discussed about the concepts, definition, and the interpretation of the caste, Jati, and Varna systems, and the views expressed by different sociologists and anthropologists. Before concluding this discussion, let us summarize the discussion which you have made so far. In conclusion, the casteism is not a monolithic or unchanging institution, but rather a layered and evolving social reality shaped by religious ideals, regional customs, economic forces, and colonial interventions. The distinction between Varna as a theoretical ideal and Jati as a localized, lived experience allowed us to appropriate the complexity and diversity within a caste practices across India. Scholars like Ghurye, Dumont, Hutton, Srinivasan help decode caste's multifaceted nature, whether as a moral order, a ritual hierarchy, or colonial artifact. While the systems rigidly and inequality have faced criticism and reform, especially since the colonial period, understanding its historical depth is essential to addressing the caste-related issues in contemporary India. Though critical engagement with text, traditions, and academic thought, we are better equipped to challenge injustice while respecting the cultural and historical context in which caste evolved. Let us approach the subject with both academic rigor and ethical sensitivity. Thank you very much for your kind hearing. I request you to forward this link to your students, scholars, colleagues, and group people to understand the concepts of Jati, Varna, and caste system, how it has evolved, and what is its interpretation and views expressed by different anthropologists and sociologists. Thank you very much Hope we will meet you in the another discussion. I request you subscribe this channel to know more on Vedic anthropological interpretation of Indian culture and society. Thank you very much.